Hi, and welcome to Inidibu. It's a place where we discuss books and bookish concerns. I hope you'll read along with us. And when we talk about a book in today's video, we're going to try to hold up a copy of the book if we have one, and enjoy the discussion. So I'm Graham.
I'm Kim.
And what are we going to talk about today, Kim?
Well, I have a question for you this week, and it is, have you ever gifted someone or lent someone a book and then was disappointed by their reaction to the book, and maybe it was even a bit of a deal breaker?
Oh, I see. So I see where you're going, because a book can have such a profound effect on you personally, and you want to share that personal experience with someone who's special to you, right? Whether that's a relative or a friend or a significant other. And let's say you do that and they don't appreciate that book on the level that you do, it can cause a rift of sorts.
Has that ever happened to you?
Yeah, probably a few times, but I remember this one example. Okay, I was backpacking in India with my paramour at the time, and I took along a copy of a book that was very special to me. It's called Ficciones by Jorge Luis Borges, who is the famous Argentinian author and librarian. I have a copy here. This is actually the copy that I traveled with, and I lent this book to my significant other, and their reaction was meh. Now it worked both ways, because they gave me copies of books that they were interested in at the time. She was reading a lot of Paulo Coelho, and so I read some of those books, and some of them were good, but my general reaction was also meh. Now this was probably emblematic of a larger rift, and we ended up, the relationship didn't last, but we didn't break up because of books per se, but I guess we did break up because there was a fundamental, we weren't on the same page about things, both figuratively and literally, let's say. And, I think at that time I was naive enough to think that if I recommended a work of art to someone, whether it was a book or a movie or music, they would end up liking that thing just because I introduced it to them, because self-evidently those works of art are wonderful, and of course they have to like them. I think I've evolved in the sense that now I think that a work of art really has to speak to someone at that time in their life. And just because you don't necessarily like Ficciones by Borges when I recommend it to you, doesn't mean that, it just means that it didn't speak to you. And you know what? That's fine. Different works of art speak to different people at different times in their life, and that's fine. And we shouldn't try to force things on people. Is that an evolved point of view?
Well, it's interesting. Yeah, I think sometimes right book at right time.
But having said that, there can be examples where it is a deal breaker. But how about you? Have you ever experienced someone not liking something that you recommended to them?
Well, I've had some pretty good luck with the books that I've recommended or shared with people. So for instance, I shared Mary Oliver with you, and you really liked her work. Yeah. And I think we have a copy of one of her poetry books, which was one of the ones I lent to you because I knew you would love it, and it's her Dog Songs. This
is Dog Songs by Mary Oliver. If you like dogs and poetry, do check out this book.
Yeah, and I also got a different book of poetry of Mary Oliver's for my mom, and she really liked it. And that can be really special when you share something that you really treasure with someone, and then they treasure it as well. I know that I really love the book One Straw Revolution, and I lent it to you. But again, I kind of thought you would enjoy it, but in some ways it was important to me that you liked the book, because it's not just something that I like and enjoyed while I was reading, but it really presents a philosophy of life that I admire and strive towards. So, in some ways it was important that you saw that in the book, because it's a philosophy of life, not just something that you sort of read and then go on to the next thing with.
Yeah, this, One Straw Revolution, it's by Masanobu Fukuoka, and it was written in the 1970s and kind of became this worldwide phenomenon. Like it's very much him describing his own experiences planting an orchard in Japan. And so it's very specific to that climate and that ecology and that situation. However, it's the philosophy, as you say, behind it. And he's the one who really popularized the idea of seed bombing, which is, you know, putting a bunch of earth with seeds in it and kind of throwing it and watching things grow.
Mm-hmm. And no-till gardening.
And no-till gardening. And actually, Kim recommended this book to me, and my brother also sent me a copy of this book for Christmas.
But after you already read it.
But that just shows that it's a book that you know, really speaks to people, and they feel they want to share it with the world. So I think it's a fantastic example of. And yeah, both of those people thought that I would really enjoy this book, and that's great. But you know, if I didn't enjoy it, then it would be you know, it would cause a rift in some relationships, both family and otherwise. So good
a
example.
tester of a book.
Yeah, definitely.
I think sometimes it's not just that someone, like, it's one thing if someone really dislikes the book, but maybe sometimes they just don't have as an enthusiastic reaction as you did. And for me, for example, I really loved the book H is for Hawk, and you know, I was even surprised at how much I loved it, because sometimes the books that get a lot of press kind of let you down, but not this book. I think it's just wonderfully written, and I love the way she weaves two narratives within it, her own and then
T.H. White's.
T.H. White's. And I lent it to you because I thought you'd enjoy it, and you did. But
yeah.
Then you only gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and I was a little like, what? Where'd the other star go? And
we're talking about a Goodreads rating. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, and that became a sore spot because it wasn't a perfect rating. But you know, some books speak to people stronger than other people at different times in their lives. And
yeah.
As I said, I think that's fine.
Yeah.
But you know, you were disappointed in that rating. I guess.
A little bit, yeah. And then also another example of, I think there's some works of fiction and nonfiction that are just so beautifully written and wonderful and have the term classic attached to them for a reason, and sometimes you're a little surprised at people who sort of almost slag them off or just think they're mediocre. And I remember years ago there was a friend who had their Goodreads attached to Facebook, and they rated Middlemarch by George Eliot, and they only gave it 3 out of 5 stars, and I was a little taken aback by that. So I even commented, you only gave it 3 stars? And they were like, yeah, that means it's good. Which I just found it hard to digest that for a few moments, and then sort of wondered, like, maybe nothing gets 5 out of 5 for them. So maybe that's partly why. But I really love this book, Middlemarch, so maybe I should lend it to you one day.
Yeah,
and see what you think.
It's something I need to read.
Yeah.
But I guess that's a part of a larger discussion. Like, art is subjective, right? Mm-hmm. And I just spouted off how I'm an enlightened being, and that I feel that now I am accepting that you know, people are attracted to art that speaks to them, and not all art speaks to all people at all times, etc. Mm-hmm. Wow, that's an enlightened point of view. But do you think that there is like a benchmark of like a book that is just so classic that if you don't like it, it shows that you are, I don't know, an intellectual lightweight or something?
I don't know if I'd ever like put it in terms of like, you know, intellectual lightweight or something, but I think that maybe sometimes there is a book, and I think book more than movie or television, because you spend a lot of time with a book, and at least I feel that your mind sits with it longer, develops with it longer than a movie, and even music, because, you know, sometimes I just think we hear things very differently depending on the way that tones hit our ears. But anyways, I think that especially things that have a way of life or a philosophy of life or politically are really aligned with you, and someone was like really turned off by that, it could maybe signal like, hey, we can be acquaintances, but probably won't be best friends. But not necessarily, because you know, great friendships can come from people who have different opinions. What about you? Is there a work of literary genius that you think if someone doesn't see it, you'd be like,
I think that if someone didn't appreciate the works of Ursula Le Guin, who was one of my favorite authors, then that would mean that we didn't have the same ethical values and political values, and that that would be a source of distance between us. No, I'm going to change my answer. Calvin and Hobbes, for the exact same reason. If you don't like Calvin and Hobbes, we definitely can't be friends.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because one year for Christmas, Graham gifted me, because we had been talking about our mutual love of Calvin and Hobbes, the complete set of all the Calvin and Hobbes comics. And this is a really wonderful edition. And I recommend, even if you haven't read Calvin and Hobbes, to check it out. And maybe when our libraries are open again, you could, borrow it from your library. And if they don't have it, you should maybe make a request that they get it.
Yeah, Calvin and Hobbes by Bill Waterson. He really wrote these back in the 90s, and that was really a high watermark for the comics that used to appear in newspaper, strip comics in newspapers, and yeah, just one of the best comic strips ever created, and he's one of the greatest cartoonists, and just very humane and intelligent and funny and insightful. Calvin and Hobbes is wonderful. So I definitely will judge you if you're not into Calvin and Hobbes. That's just the way it is. Here's a really fun book to get on a kind of lighter side of things. Here's a really fun book that I read in university at it was like a sci-fi course that I took, but it was all about books about aliens, but with kind of like a feminist twist. And so one of the best books that I read in that course was called The Pride of Chanur by C.J. Cherryh. And basically it's the story of an astronaut who somehow gets lost in space, and he ends up hanging out on a ship with a group of lion aliens. So it's a society of like lion people, and I don't know if you know anything about lion culture on Earth, but lions are a matriarchal society. So the same thing with these alien lion people. They the female lionesses, I guess, are the kind of resource gatherers and the explorers in that society, and the male lions are just layabouts who fight with each other over mating rights or whatever. And anyway, it's a really fun, interesting book. Has an amazing cover. Here it is, The Pride of Chanur. I highly recommend this book, and I think I gave it to you for Christmas one year, and you read this book and you really enjoyed it as well. Yeah,
it's really fun, and it's a good book for right now if you want something that just sort of takes you out of this world and is kind of quick and just, as you said, fun, but still really interesting, some of the ideas in it.
Yeah. It has a message, but yeah, it's been a while since I read it. And this copy actually has 3 books in the Chanur Saga, continuing with Chanur's Venture and the Kif Strike Back. Highly recommend it.
So I guess now that we've been talking about this for a little bit, I now think of it maybe more in terms of, it's not that if someone didn't appreciate the wisdom or the writing of a book that you gave them, it's not that that would necessarily cause so much of a questioning of a relationship or anything. But if someone truly appreciates a work of art or a work of literature that you truly appreciate, and you can have really great discussions about that you can build a relationship on that. And maybe it creates a new connection.
Oh, that's an interesting idea. Yeah, I think the point here is that the works of art, the books that we're talking about, meant a lot to us personally, and if another person doesn't appreciate those works of art, that kind of insults you on a personal level.
Yeah.
You know, it shouldn't,
but
because art is subjective.
Yes.
But it does.
Yeah.
Like, this meant a lot to me personally, and then, you know, you didn't appreciate it. Oh man, that hurts.
I guess sometimes it feels like, oh, so you don't maybe appreciate that part of me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it is a personal thing, and like, it shouldn't be, maybe, but and you shouldn't, I guess on some level you shouldn't be judging people on what their taste in art is, but people do that all the time. And I think bookish people, it's really important that you know, that you, if not, like, you don't have to love the same things, but like respect the same things and have some like overlap in the things you like. That's important.
Yeah, because of course there's always things that you don't agree on.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought that we could end this episode on what we're currently reading.
Well, this is April 2020, so we're all kind of in quarantine mode. So I picked up from the local library I work at, Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall, which is a giant brick of a book. I'm about four-fifths of the way through. This is part of a 3-book series, and the 3rd book was just published a few weeks ago, so I decided to get a start on this series. Now, I watched the mini-series, the BBC mini-series, which is absolutely fantastic, and I have to say this book is even better than the mini-series. The writing is absolutely beautiful. It really puts you in that world of the 1500s. It's the story of Thomas Cromwell. It's historical fiction. He was an advisor to Henry VIII. So if you're at all interested in that time period or historical fiction, this is one of the best examples, recent examples. It won the Man Booker Prize in 2009. And it's just, you know, it's kind of, she's really good at making the world of that time and the political concerns seem kind of alien to our sensibilities. You know, there's people being burned alive for heresy. I mean, it's like a world that we can't understand on some level. But through the character of Thomas Cromwell, he's kind of like, he has modern sensibilities, and he's very humane and he's very kind. But he's also, you know, he's of lower birth, so he kind of worked his way up to the top by being the smartest guy in the room. So you're always cheering for this. You want this character to succeed, Thomas Cromwell. So it's a really fantastically written, really enlightening series, I think, and I'm really enjoying Wolf Hall.
Oh, great. I'm currently reading this book called At the Center of All Beauty, which is by Fenton Johnson, and I thought maybe it was a fitting book for right now because it's about solitude and the creative life. And so it's a mix of him telling the story of how he views himself as a solitary figure and that of his family, especially his mother and his father. But each chapter also then looks at different like historical figures. So for instance, the first chapter looks at some things to do with Thoreau's life, Emily Dickinson at one point. So throughout the book, there's different figures he looks at, but then he also mixes that with how he relates or sees similarities with his life. And you know, I kind of thought it was the sort of book, like in so many ways, what it says it's about is right up my alley, but I'm not totally enamored with the book at the moment, but I'm about halfway done. But that could all change. Sometimes that does change when you read a book, which is kind of another interesting discussion. When do you give up on a book, or do you ever give up on a book when you're reading it? So maybe that for a future episode. But anyways, that is what I'm reading right now. Thanks so much for watching. If you liked this, please consider subscribing down below and clicking the thumbs up button. It's much appreciated.
And if you can think of an example of a book that you love so much, or that you would be devastated if you lent this book to someone and they did not like it, put that in the comments.
Yeah, definitely. Good discussion starter.
And if you have any opinions on any of the books that we brought up in today's episode, let us know as well.
Yeah, even if you totally hate them. We'd love to hear about it.
We will not be heartbroken.
No.
We'll just judge you harshly. Thanks.
Thanks.